All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the Actual Anarchy podcast where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian and Anarcho-Capitalist perspective. Tonight, we're bringing an old friend back. He hasn't been on in a long time. I think his last appearance was right before we introduced The Last Nighters. And so we're going back, I think, to episode 57, The Last Jedi, when we had the professional asshole on. We will introduce him in the Last Nighters portion of the show. But this is the Actual Anarchy podcast. This is episode 133, and we are talking about Legends of the Fall. This is a Father's Day special episode because the Anthony Hopkins character is a badass libertarian anarchist father in this movie, and he does some pretty badass stuff.
What a great dad. Hey, babe. Hey, how you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing well, my friend Robert. We'll get into The Last Nighters in a moment here, but I just wanted to, we like to talk about your travels between the East and the West.
Oh, yeah.
On the show here. So now you're back on the West Side.
Yeah. I woke up to a beautiful gift this morning. I don't know if you ever get gifts from your pets. Do you ever get gifts from your pets, Daniel? Not like an Amazon present or something like that. I'm talking like the best they can do, like the head of a robin or something.
Or like the heart of something.
Yeah, maybe. Today I woke up with my cat. She was meowing super loud. And that usually means she's like, hey, yo, I got some, food for everybody. Come on, come and get it. And I wake up and there's this baby bunny sitting on my bed. And she's sitting right next to it, meowing at me. And then the baby bunny realizes it's not in my cat's mouth at the moment, and he takes off. Then the cat springs after it and then disappears. And so then I've got to dig my entire closet out to try and find this baby bunny, which essentially it's so minuscule that it can cram itself into any kind of little wedge-shaped form. Anyway, it took me like a half an hour to actually get to it while I'm sweating. Finally take it outside, find a nice briar patch to release it into, and then it doesn't want to go anywhere. It's just sitting there. And I'm like, is it broken? I don't know. Finally, I had to pick it up and drop it, and then it shot off like a little rocket. But yeah, fun. Gifts.
This is a really interesting way for Robert to admit that he was getting sweaty in the closet with a bunny, only to have the bunny shoot off like a rocket afterwards. I don't know.
No, those are the key moments. Those are the key points of that story. You're right.
So, Robert, before we get into the Last Nighters portion of the show, I just want to mention that your audio is cutting out a bit, so we might do better with no video feed.
Oh, no. Uh-oh. Okay.
Professional asshole, did you notice anything cutting in and out with his audio?
I did, but I was able to understand the story well enough that I wanted to let him finish talking about being in the closet.
That's very
thank you for letting him finish.
Letting him finish. Yes. And we are, gentlemen, on the Last Nighters here. So we're going to get into the Last Nighters portion of the show right after this. Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, The Last Nighters, and The Last Nighters are part of the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. We are going to be doing a Father's Day special tonight with a special guest. This is going to be episode 76. You can find the show notes and more at lastnighters.com/76. And our guest hails from the East Coast, so it's late for him now. But he is a father, and this is the Father's Day special. He is the professional asshole. He's rather prolific in masculine communities on Facebook and Minds. He's a friend of mine. We go way back. We've talked to him before, and you can go back into the show notes page at lastnighters.com/76 and find the episodes where he has made appearances in the past. But how are you doing, sir? Thank you for joining us for this show, this movie that you have selected.
I'm doing great. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Well, we do enjoy hanging out with you, and you're I don't want to say it's like a unique perspective, but it's like a perspective that people are reticent to vocalize. I'll put it that way. And I like the brass balls tactic that you have to just lay it out there. And, I may not always agree with you, but I always respect you.
Yeah, well, at this point in my life, my goal is basically to say something that's more outlandish than even I probably believe, only for the purpose of getting other people to voice something, like just to be willing to speak up. Like if I can do it, you can do it. Trust me.
All right, watch the ways of the master here. So, Robert, how are you doing, sir? You are now back on the West Side, and
and it's way sweatier over here. I don't think it's me. It's just sweatier.
I think that's all the leftism coming out of Seattle. It's drenching us in few tears, creating all the humidity in the air here. All right.
So it sucks.
Well, it'll cool off, I think. We had a few hot days in a row, but we'll get back down for a little while before we get in the blazing hot mid-80s highs of summer that we get here.
How long could we push that pause?
Well, I thought you would have a response, but it's okay. Let's get into our show here. We're going to be talking about Legends of the Fall, and here's the Google information. Came out in 1994. It's a drama of 2 hours and 13 minutes, 7.5 on the IMDb, 57% Rotten Tomatoes, and 45% Metacritic. However, 92% of the Google users like it. In early 20th century Montana, Colonel William Ludlow, played by Anthony Hopkins, lives in the wilderness with his sons Tristan, Alfred, and Samuel, played respectively by Brad Pitt, Aidan Quinn, and Henry Thomas. Eventually, the unconventional but close-knit family encounters tragedy when Samuel is killed in World War I. Tristan and Alfred survive their tours of duty, but soon after they return home, both men fall for Samuel's gorgeous fiancée, Susanna, played by Julian Ormond. And their intense rivalry begins to destroy the family. Release date January 13, 1995. Director's Edward Zwick. And it won an Academy Award for Best Cinematography and a Bronze Wrangler for a Theatrical Motion Picture. And that is the Google information. Robert, your response.
Yeah, so I would have to say, whoa. Is that me? Hello?
No, that is our professional asshole picking up his hands off of his computer. He's got to hold it down to eliminate any vibrations.
Apologies.
Okay, all right. I was going to say, I think the brothers' conflict is at the center of this movie, but it also has to do with the trauma that Tristan experienced in World War I and the trauma that the colonel saw in the Indian Wars. I guess they call them kind of like the Indian Wars after the Civil War, or they call it as the War for Succession, as he says in the movie. And how that plays out through the film, I think, is really strong. And I don't think that was mentioned in your Google description. They do mention that Samuel dies in World War I, but that event kind of like reverberates throughout these people's lives. Because, I mean, she's intent to, marry Samuel, and then she comes back. Well, he doesn't come back. And then she gets it on with Tristan, but then Tristan's like so messed up from the war and then not being able to save Samuel that he's not in any kind of good place, dealing with all kinds of demons, even though I don't really think it focuses so much on the war, like your traditional kind of war damage, like shell shock or PTSD or anything like that. It's more like emotional trauma from like cradling your dead brother's body and cutting out his heart and sending that home.
Sounds accurate to me.
Do we still have Daniel?
No.
We do, yeah. We're full of awkward pauses tonight. I thought you were going to say more, Robert.
I can say more. What do you want me to say? What should I talk about? You want to talk about this movie?
Yeah, let's talk about this movie, but let's go to the professional asshole. This is a movie that you selected, and double question here, double fisting the question. One, why did you particularly pick this movie? And two, your reaction to the Google description.
So I thought the Google description was, accurate, if not simplistic. So I probably don't have a ton to add to that. But the reason I chose this movie is, oddly enough, because the father and the family in general in the movie actually hits a pretty resonant chord with me. My wife and I are part owners of a cabin up in Montana inside Glacier National Park, which is very close to where this film was shot and where they were supposed to be. Well, not really close to where it was shot, but close to where they're supposed to be living in the movie. And they're Cornish Presbyterians, and I'm Presbyterian, and my wife is Cornish, at least partially. And so it was just striking a lot of chords for a long time when we wanted to figure out where we wanted to live and what we wanted to do with our lives. Living out in Montana, like sort of off the grid, maybe not having to worry too much about how others perceive us, almost in an agorist sort of a sense, was really a pretty significant temptation to us at the time because we had already spent so much time out there, and everything about it just. I sort of am a significantly kindred spirit with the father, who, like any real man, smokes cigars and works with his hands, and killed small children at some point in his life or something like that.
Oh, well, all right. Well, yeah, this is a movie that I thought played really, really long for what it was, and it wasn't clear to me what the story was. They start off with One Stab, who is this Cree Nation Indian fellow who is in advanced age and recalling all of this stuff and talking about the letters that went back and forth between the participants and all of this. But it seems to center the story on Tristan being one of those types who is sort of going to be like legendary or crazy.
Right.
I think it was said of John Lennon that somebody was talking about the type of guy that he was, and they were like, yeah, he's either going to be like really famous and amazing, or he's going to be another Hitler. Like, he just had that spark to him, like something about him is going to make huge moves. And I think that's how we're presented with this Tristan character, who, by the end of the story, which I don't want to like jump ahead to, 45 minutes from now, but it's contrasted with his own flesh and blood brother, who plays by a very different path and gets different results.
Yeah, so it's interesting that this movie is definitely meant to be, in some ways, the prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son, but somewhat in reverse, because it's the son who stays with the father that's the prodigal son, and it's the son that kind of like leaves the father is the other brother. So Alfred even says in the movies, "I live by all the laws of men and God, and everyone still loves you, Tristan, more, who broke them all and has generally brought pain on our family. And yet my father loves you more." Susanna, who is, the youngest brother, Samuel's fiance at one point, she loved you more, even though she eventually married me. It's just One Stab loves you more. Everybody loves you more, and you haven't actually helped them in any way. So in a sense, it's like the prodigal son, except in the original prodigal son, the prodigal son lives a profligate lifestyle and leaves, whereas Tristan actually stayed closer to his father in a sense.
Yeah, there was that brief period where he was like sorting himself out on the high seas and in Borneo and wherever else, smoking opium and having orgies for a few years.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, once he resolved himself and grew into the man that he was going to be, then he was much more there to be connected with his father, take care of his father, who had suffered a stroke at the same, at a time when it was revealed Tristan's letter to Susanna that, whatever we had is dead, and as dead as I am, and marry another. And that was shattering to Ludlow, because he had revered his son. He played favorites with his sons. And, I have two daughters. I can't play favorites between them. But I was a favorite of my grandfather. And so I kind of know a little bit about what that's like and how resentful others can be of that situation. And that plays up with Alfred and Tristan here. But
well, it's interesting. It's interesting how the title of the movie kind of plays into that theme, because most people, and even when the name of the movie is translated into other languages, it usually gets translated like something like Legends of Autumn or Legends of Fall Time. But that's not actually what it's supposed to be referring to. The original novel and the title of the movie refers to the fall of man from Eden. And there's obviously a lot of Edenic themes in the movie. Like, the father found his own Eden by crossing a mountain, and Eden was originally surrounded by mountains on all sides. It was a garden. That's the point. So it was the fact that the father played favorites that eventually led to the breaking of his family, because he was, in a sense, unjust towards his sons, although he was just in many other ways.
Yeah, though I'd argue that, at that end scene that you spoke out about, where Alfred played by the rules of man and the rules of God, and nobody liked him, and Tristan lived free. He lived free. And I think that's what attracted others to him. But the rules that Alfred lived by were lies. Maybe not the godly rules, but the rules of man that he abided by.
Right.
He ran for Congress. He took bribes. He signed the Volstead Act or voted for it or whatever. And he partook of worldly, what's the right word? Corruption. in the political path that he chose. And yeah, it might have been the path to gain him the most influence, the most power, the most benefits for himself, but it's also the path that is a false path that's going to drive people away from you, unless they're grafting onto you, riding your coattails, and like those guys who got him to run for senator or congressman.
Right.
And that's what Anthony Hopkins' father figure said, is like, what's in it for you, gentlemen? Why are you promoting my son to be a congressman?
Yeah, and it's interesting that they do clearly show Alfred participating and taking bribes and unloading liquor with the O'Banion brothers, who are the ones, rum running. And eventually this leads to the death of Tristan's family, specifically his wife, and I suppose in a sense it leads to the death of Susanna too, who is the youngest brother's original fiance. But it's funny how Alfred, like the more he decides to serve his country, quote unquote, by going to war and by running for Congress and by signing the Volstead Act and helping its enforcement, even though he's also undermining it by helping the O'Banion brothers bring in liquor, and even going to the point where he's defending a police officer who negligently murdered Tristan's wife. We can talk about that later, but the more he serves his country, the further away he is from the rest of his family and his father and even his own wife. But the more he decides to pull away from, when he eventually kind of repents of that and comes back and decides that his family is more important than his country, that's when his family is re-annealed.
All right, I want to devote some time to Robert, because the professional asshole and I have been doing a twosome for a while. We want to invite you in on this. Do you have a response to anything that we brought up so far? Usually we do this in a bit of a linear way, but we've sort of been jumping around towards the end already. And you're very good about telling the narrative of the overall scope of the story. So twofold, any response to what we said so far, and then maybe give us a bit of a structure to follow and take it away.
Well, I do rather want to kind of just go back to the beginning. I'm just looking at my notes here, and the very first thing I wrote down was some John Q. Law types riding up to the ranch, and we get a real sense of the Colonel's character right off the bat when they're looking for one of his ranch hands, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, I think he passed through here like 5 years ago. He's off in wherever," and they're interested in, what is he? What are you looking for him for? And they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's a private issue." And he's like, "Oh, really? You're a public officer, aren't you?" But they're not even so much concerned with the state's opinion on his ranch hand guy, because they know him to be a good guy. So they're not even that concerned about it. So that just kind of shows, we get an insight to the Colonel's character. He has far more trust in his own, sense of a person's character than in trusting some government worker's opinion, which is pretty damn cool. It really sets the tone for who this guy is for the rest of the film.
Yeah, you say it's a private nature, but that's a public office you hold there, Sheriff.
Yeah.
Thought that was a really good line. But, I gotta say, in watching this movie, I feel like perhaps it wasn't pieced together as well as it could have been. And maybe a rewatch, as long as it was, a rewatch after an analysis such as this will make the movie a better watch. Like, I didn't realize at the time that was the ranch hand they were looking for. Like, they have this sketch and it sort of resembles them, kind of. And I didn't realize that was the O'Banion brothers, or is that what they are, the O'Banion brothers? And they were the ones running liquor. So what did the ranch hand do that the O'Banion brothers would be interested in? Because there is a resolution, at the end, because they end up in that, incident where they kill Tristan's wife. That's, what's his name? Decker's child. That's his daughter. Right. So there is a full circle to it. But in the time when this is presented in the first, 20 minutes of the movie, I have no idea who any of these people are or what's going on. I do appreciate Hopkins' response to them. But I think without the underlying knowledge of who they are and what eventually happens, it's very unclear what's going on when you're watching this movie in real time.
Well, what's really interesting, and this is probably a detail that I had not picked up on the first even couple watchings of this, but Decker, the character, if you look closely at him in a couple of scenes, they've put makeup on where he has like a rope burn around his neck. And it's clearly they're trying to show that at some point somebody tried to lynch him. So I don't know.
Aha. Interesting. No, I did not notice that. But I did. I felt the same as you, Daniel, at the very beginning. It's like, who is this guy? Who are they looking for? It's clear that maybe they know him if they're going to lie for him. But then you watch the movie, and as it goes on, that character every time like some stranger comes around, and it might be a log guy. He like dips his hat down low and kind of starts walking away. So it's like, okay, yeah, that was the guy.
Yeah, it's sort of like revealed in those subtle cues, but I feel like it sort of diminishes storytelling if you're just going to be there watching it at the time. Like, who the hell is this? What's going on? It's confusing, and I don't know how else they could have done it other than have people who've read the book come and watch the movie, because I'm sure the book would explain all of this stuff here. But
they really need. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, I'm of two minds of it. I mean, on the one hand, I understand your position. It is a little bit confusing and you're kind of in the dark. But at the same time, there is something to be said for the characters knowing more than the audience. And you're just kind of like watching their world unfold. And then the story unfolds to the audience. So it leaves it more of a mystery. You know what I'm saying?
If they're deftly handling that, and then there's like a reveal, like, oh, that's that guy. But I don't feel like there really was that moment of, oh, that's that guy.
Fair enough.
I think it probably could have been solved by a 30-second clip, probably in the first 5 minutes of the movie, where, Decker comes along and, asks for work. And, they have some artful dialogue to show that he's on the run, but he's not otherwise dangerous. He's not a harmful man. He's just, broke some asshole's law somewhere. Who gives a crap where?
Yeah, and that may be a scene in the book that we didn't get, but that probably would have helped along the storytelling just a little bit. I don't think the movie suffers too much without it, but yeah, I could see that being a good scene.
And Decker in and of himself is an ancillary character. I mean, his daughter is more important than Decker himself.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We're kind of nitpicking here. What do you guys think about? I want to get into the very beginning. Right after that, the next notes I have are the boys wanting to go to war. And this, I don't know if you guys listen to like Hardcore History or anything like that, but Dan Carlin did a great series on World War I recently. I think it's still available for free if anyone wants to check that out. But this movie obviously doesn't get into a whole lot of the World War I. The boys just kind of go there. Sam gets killed, and then they're like done with World War I. So it's not a big part of the movie, but of course the repercussions are big. But in the very beginning, when the boys, especially Sam, are really talking about why they need to go to war. And the boys are like, we need to defend our allies. And like, defend what is theirs. And then the colonel's like, yeah, defend what's yours. Not someplace you've never been. What are you talking about? But Samuel describes the Germans in World War I as being naked aggression. And I don't know how the news portrayed, the news propaganda portrayed the Germans at the time. I know there was a lot of propaganda with them like barbecuing people and killing, whole cities and whatnot. And hindsight's 2020. And, the true story is better told. I'm not saying it's all coming out, but the Germans in World War I, Carlin does a good job of explaining how World War I began, basically from the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by Gavrilo Princip in Sarajevo. And that triggered World War I basically by this spider web of alliances and defensive pact treaties. And it's really hard to call out the Germans as being the bad guys. Like, I know they got painted as that, and the Treaty of Versailles was brutal against the German people, but it's really this. I mean, you're talking about a Europe where almost every ruler is like a cousin of another ruler. So it's like they all know each other. It's like the British ruler was like a cousin to the Kaiser, and they called them like, cute little nicknames, and they all hung out, from time to time.
And Tsar Nicholas was related to the Kaiser as well.
Right. So it's like this, and they all had, it's not like they all intensely hated each other and whatnot. And this is just the Germans rolling out and smashing people. And I would argue that World War II was much more of a German land grab than anything in World War I happened. But anyway, Sam thinks, and he says that joining World War I is the, quote, only honorable thing to do. Yeah. And go ahead if you want to jump in on that.
It's interesting how in the movie there's a repeated theme that you have a far greater duty to your family than you do to your country, because countries being ruled by far-off people who don't necessarily care about their individual constituents have no real reason to care about how many people die in war. Napoleon certainly didn't. Most rulers are more than willing to send young boys to the slaughter by the hundreds, thousands, and even millions in order to gain a few political points. So why would I waste my time, energy, money, and resources and my family, which is my most important resource, in order to support this when I don't have to, especially if I'm not being forced to. I could understand if you're being, conscripted into service, how you might, I'll go and I'll try to stay out. I mean, I'll maybe improve my chances of surviving by staying low in a ditch and being a disloyal jerk. But hey, who cares, right? But to go volunteer for a far off political thing, and Samuel, who, by the way, if anybody watches this movie and wants to know, Samuel is played by the same boy who is Elliot in E.T. So forget
that's fun.
But this was like his first adult role, really. But his argumentation was, they already killed 2 of our cousins, and the father responds, 2 of the cousins you never met who live in England. You don't know them,
right? Yeah, there's a great quote later on in the movie by the Colonel, who's arguing with Alfred, and he's like, Samuel was a soldier. Soldiers die, sent to their slaughter by men in government.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is exactly what happens. They don't care that, like you said, they win political points, or they're, I don't have the words right now.
Well, I'll just pile on to that, because he goes on to further say, men like you, damn you to hell, because his son was working for the government at that point. And the colonel had been burned by government in the Indian Wars and the War of Secession, which he called it appropriately. And he talks about it with the guys who want his son to run for Congress. Well, the solution for the Indians was to kill them, burn women, children, whole villages. That's the government's solution. And I haven't seen anything from then till now to show me that they know any other solution other than that. And he goes on to say in the film, civilized is no word to describe the affairs of this world.
Right, and that government has neither wisdom nor humanity. And then Alfred responds to that by saying that he's going to inject wisdom and humanity into Congress.
Got to get the right people in there, Robert.
You just got to get the right guy. We just haven't found the right guy yet, Daniel. I'm sure it'll work at some point. We just got to find the right one.
Well, and he absolutely got Lord Acton. I mean, he may have had good intentions. His father tried to tell him otherwise, but he went along with it. He signed the Volstead Act. He was running alcohol behind the scenes, giving government protections to his crony friends who are giving him kickbacks. It's just, the corruption is on display in this film, and I just love the Hopkins character, man. He's calling him out for everything, and he was probably a Kool-Aid drinker back in the day. Back in what we would consider or what is normally called the Civil War. He was probably fully on board with that. But right, then when it comes time to, he was trying to protect lives in the Indian Wars. Get people out of harm's way, and the government just slaughtered them. And so he got soured on that, and he walked away.
And you literally see that at the beginning of the movie, where he just looks at, this line of people being marched across the country in shame, and he picks up his sword and throws it down to the ground, throws his gloves down, and throws his hands up. And one stab is in there in the background, dressed in a Union Army uniform with presumably his oldest son.
Right, because he was one of the civilized tribes, right? So he was part of the U.S. Army.
Yeah, he could be, which, again, I tried to figure out a timeline for this movie. It's a little tough. As far as I can tell, he must have been involved with some of the Indian wars that happened in the late 1880s and early 1890s in the Dakota territories.
That's what I kind of assumed.
It's just, it's not, I mean, I could see him being born young enough to have been witness to the Civil War, but probably not a participant, because even if he was 60 in 1913, that would have put him as being born in 1853, and he would have been 12 at the end of the Civil War. So it's a little hard to figure out exactly where it is, but he certainly served during the Indian campaign of the 1870s through 1880s. Must have quit. I mean, he was in long enough to become a colonel, probably by about the early 1890s or so, or maybe middle 1890s.
Yeah, and then one stab, he's telling the story, right? And Tristan actually dies from the bear fight in 1963 as a old man, in his late 60s.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So, in almost 1970, one stab.
Well, and I looked at some of the, they had grave markers at the end of the movie, and I was like, oh, let me see if I can try to find dates on this. Not that they were consistent, and they weren't actually, but it looked like, Alfred was born in 1892 and Samuel was born in 1895. So Tristan must have been born sometime in the middle there, which seemed like they were portraying the boys as being a little older. So I don't know, but Samuel was died in 1915, so he was 20. So that maybe Tristan was 22 and Alfred was 23, 24.
Yeah, I really do. To go back to the beginning of the war thing, I really do appreciate that all three boys went to war, even though their father is basically like this libertarian anarchist guy. I mean, I think I would probably do a better job as a father to keep my kids out of war, but I'm not going to judge. I mean, the movie has to happen. But this is at a time when there's still a lot of romanticism concerning war. And I think that was part of the colonel's job to be like, no, this is some horrific shit. You don't want to deal with it. But a lot of the men, especially like at the beginning of World War I, were going to war and like afraid that the war would be over before they got to get into combat. They really saw it as this way of graduating into manhood, that, you really made your bones or whatever. It's really kind of like this kind of camaraderie that you would go and you'd become a man after going to war, and then you'd come back and, be this hero and whatnot. And I'm really glad that the character of the colonel is there to throw water on that, but also the reality of war, not so much the horrors of World War I, because it's more about the emotional loss of Samuel and whatnot. But at least that they had this great loss and they come back completely changed people and are having to deal with it their entire lives. Because that's what happens when you go to war. You come back and you are completely different. You are a mess. There's maybe brief glimpses where you were your old self, but people deal with massive, massive trauma. I mean, we did a movie called Rambo. Well, of course, everybody knows Rambo, but it was pretty much all about a Vietnam vet dealing with the trauma that he went through from the war. And that's, light duty compared to what people are dealing with these days.
Right. And just to pile on that a little bit more, you talked about the Dangerous History podcast talking about World War I. Ralph Raico has great lectures on World War I and the lead up to it. So I'm going to post that in our show notes page as well. But if you guys, and question my man card here, but if you've seen Downton Abbey,
yes, I have
demonstrated in the lead up to the war, World War I, that they are excited to go and see the world and do something heroic. And they were afraid they were going to miss it. It's at least how it's portrayed in the movie or in that show. And I think that is something that the Samuel character, who's a bit naive, he's the youngest one. He's the one who's about to get married. He hasn't even had sex yet. He doesn't feel like he's a man yet. And so he has this big drive to go and prove his manhood. And I think Tristan goes just to protect him. And I'm not sure what Alfred's motivation is, but Tristan only goes because his family goes.
Right. Yeah. I don't know what Alfred's point in going in is either. He's definitely not the central character in this film. And I'm not sure his motivations are entirely clear in any of the things he does, because the boys are all so different, or at least Tristan and Alfred are so different. How he got that way, because the mother isn't involved in the story, right? I mean, she writes letters here and there, but it's not like her influence really influences Alfred and the colonel's really influences Tristan. It's not really done that way.
Yeah, and Tristan refuses to even speak of her after she leaves. So it's funny how loyal Tristan seems to be to his own family. His concerns are only for his own family, and if you leave the family, you're outside of the circle of trust, fucker.
Got my eyes on you, fucker. You know what? I actually think maybe the motivation for Alfred agreeing to go to the war was because Samuel was intent on going, and Alfred wanted approval from his father, and so he was the first to say, "Okay, I'm going too, because I want your approval, Dad." But Dad looks to Tristan to protect Samuel.
But Dad doesn't want any of them to go. He just wants them to stay, and then when Sam's like, "I'll bring you back like the pin of the helmet of the Kaiser." He's like, "Just you come back. I don't give a shit. I don't care about some dumb hat. Just come back alive," which means he's gonna die.
Right.
Yeah. And he did try to dissuade them, and even Tristan tried to get Susanna to dissuade Samuel from going, and Susanna was like, "No, you make him not go." And I guess Samuel was so intent on going that he trekked to Calgary in Canada, which these days, or at least in the 70s, people were going to Canada to avoid going to war. It's a little bit different back then. But yeah, I don't know why. I mean, you need to have this story happen, but it seems like Susanna and the dad and Tristan all telling him, "Hey, this is a terrible idea. Don't do it," might have had a little bit more influence on him.
Yeah, it's interesting that we should probably talk more about the character of Susanna for a bit, because she is herself sort of another point of contention. So Tristan himself is a point of contention for the whole family because he's such a passionate person in whatever way you want to define that. He is so influenced by his passions that he divides his own family. His father is set against his brother, and his brother is set against himself. And it's like he wants good for his family, but because he wants what he wants so intently, it ends up becoming a problem for the rest of his family. And Susanna is almost kind of like that too. Her introduction to the family disrupts its dynamic. Like almost the second, I mean, she gets off the train, and almost the second she sees Tristan, she has given him fuck me eyes like you wouldn't believe.
Right, and Alfred is all over her with the googly eyes too.
Yeah, exactly. So,
what was Sam doing? Really, bringing that piece of ass, into the ranch? I mean, she's the only one there.
No, you do not bring a mare into a pen full of studs. I mean, come on.
It just seems like a big time rookie move,
Yeah, I know, man. Exactly. Especially when you got Brad Pitt as a brother. I mean, geez. Yeah, just talk about undercutting yourself.
Fox in the hen house.
Exactly. What did you guys think about Susanna as a character? Because it seemed to me that she actually, aside from being a plot point, she's almost a MacGuffin. She's actually not all that interesting herself.
No, she seems to be defined by how she interacts with the sons.
Right. Which I'm not going to even say is bad. I mean, in many ways, that is kind of the way of the world. Not that, women are disinteresting on their own necessarily, but they are a point of contention and an impetus for male action.
For sure. Yeah. But this is probably a movie where I wouldn't even call her a protagonist, but she definitely doesn't necessarily have any agency of her own.
Yeah, I would probably pretty much put her as a MacGuffin.
Right.
Because, yeah, she's basically a MacGuffin.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, other than, this is probably just defining a MacGuffin, what her point of being there was other than to move the plot along. Because she, was engaged to Samuel, but then she goes there to the ranch and Alfred wants her and she wants Tristan. And so it becomes this little tangled web. And then after Samuel dies, Alfred basically offers himself to her and she's like, no, not going to happen, buddy. Sorry. And then as soon as she sees Tristan, it's like,
couldn't be drier.
It's on, it's on. And they have a passionate, however long, whatever the timeline is, a few months maybe. But he's been damaged from the war. He's got PTSD, I'm sure. And he's wandering. He's lost. His brother died, cut his heart out, brought it home. He scalped a bunch of Germans in response and went crazy and probably spent some time in the brig. Because they talk about, when Alfred gets home from the war, that Tristan has written a letter. He's like, yeah, it's going to take me a little bit longer to get home. So I think he was probably dealing with some court-martial or some other issue.
Well, he said that he had asked his grandfather Ludlow, if he could spend some time at sea with him. So that was
that might be what it was then. But yeah, he needed some time to find himself.
Yeah.
And what did Colonel Ludlow call it? The madness. Trying to quell the madness or the spirit of the bear. And he would sometimes be quiet enough to where he could sort of interact more normal, but then he would rise to the surface and Tristan would need to kind of just be alone, and be out and just being, a hunter and a traveler and exploring the world to avoid his own internal demons, I think.
Yeah, it seemed like, it's the story arc of Tristan in general for him to not be able to, stay in any one spot for more than a day or two. Or, they compare him to a bear consistently. Like it's this untamable animal.
Speaking of which, let's talk about the time when they all go for a drink at the bar.
Yeah, right. That was definitely not the best scene there.
Not so good for Tristan there. So the four of them go to some bar, and the barkeep's like, yeah, I can only serve you 3 instead of the 4 because we don't serve Indians. And Tristan takes some umbrage to this and basically, tries to start a fight, and then grabs the guy's blackjack or billy club and bashes him over the head and then sticks a gun in his head. And yeah, I get it. Racism is bad, but this guy has his own personal preferences. We don't know his motivations for not wanting to serve Indians. Maybe they raped and murdered his family. We don't know, but it also doesn't matter. It's his private property. He can serve that guy or not. And Tristan does not. I mean, this is his madness going through, right? Because this is his friend. This is his family. This is the most important thing in the world. And this is the hill he's going to die on, right or wrong.
Yeah, I think this was a moment of him breaking into that emotional, that emotional sense like you were talking about earlier, professional asshole. Because this is a period where he's come back from the war and he's with Susanna and things seem to be going well, things are passionate, but then he starts becoming more distant. And then this event happens at the bar. And really the right answer, and Robert, you basically just said this, is you order 4. He says, no, just 3 beers because I'm not serving that guy. The right answer is, okay, no beers. We'll take our business elsewhere. Now it's bumfuck Montana, so who knows if there's another establishment nearby. But I mean, that's how you deal with racism, is if he makes it known, you don't partake in him. You don't go to his bar or his shop or whatever.
Right. Why would you want to patronize him if he's this Indian racist guy and you're best friends with an Indian guy? So why would you want to financially support him?
And it's funny, too, because the way they were presenting Colonel Ludlow there is that, he obviously had the same distaste Tristan had for the racism, but he was willing to negotiate with the guy. He even said, no, Tristan, I'm handling it. Like we're about to have a negotiation here. And it seems that, the way they portray the colonel is that he is competent enough to be able to make a negotiation like that without any major problems. He'd be able to get the guy to acquiesce to his desires, and he
sure. And I also, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And he correctly points out, like, hey, this guy outweighs you by 20 pounds and he's got a billy club under his head and he should crack your skull and, good riddance to you. But so it's just, it's the fact that Tristan, it's not just that, he just can't control himself, much less his own life and situation. And, we move on from that scene to one where he's trying to, free a calf from a barbed wire fence, and is a reminiscent scene to the way his brother died, and he just cannot handle it.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to go back to Hopkins in that scene though, in the bar, where I think his character is recognizing, he's the wrongness of Tristan's actions, not only for the fact that he could get killed, but that you are attacking this guy's like private property. You don't have any right to do this. And then also he's noticing the madness in his son, and it's worrying him. So I think it's really well acted by Hopkins in that scene.
Yeah, he's seeing that Tristan is just being emotional. He's just being an SJW Antifa.
Right, exactly.
And,
you're not going to give me the thing I want.
Yeah, you guys are wrong on that. I don't know what you're talking about. Have you ever met a social justice warrior with abs?
Oh, shit, right. He works that way too much.
Yeah, we stand corrected.
And he eats all that meat. Yeah, no,
he just eats. Yeah, it's like he lives on a pure meat diet. Doesn't even know what fiber is.
Yeah, but this is like part of that build up to Tristan coming to that breaking point, right? And then he abandons Susanna and he goes on his PTSD spirit walk so he can hunt and sail and do opium and Asian ladies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they invented ladyboys at that point, so at least he wasn't, really sinning against God. Who knows?
Yeah, it leaves that part out. Maybe it's in the book.
Yeah. Right.
But finally they get a letter from Tristan. He's been gone for who knows how long. And he tells Susanna, you know what, I'm dead inside, and so is our relationship. And this is the thing that I think shatters Colonel Ludlow. And that's kind of what precipitates the stroke, right? There's this big fight between Susanna and Alfred and Colonel Ludlow because the Colonel's like, oh, Tristan's going to come back and marry her. And that's the way it's going to be. And, he's doing playing the favorites thing and seeing Tristan in the most favorable light possible in the situation. And Alfred's actually kind of right. Tristan's gone. And he's not coming back for you. He might come back, but he's not coming back for Susanna.
Right. And I tend to think that Alfred is absolutely correct in that scene. If you intend on marrying this woman, and everybody, it seems like everybody's kind of lying to themselves about Tristan and how far gone he is. Because it does say something about somebody when they are like, yeah, we're going to get married. And then he fucks off for like 5 years. It's kind of actions speaking louder than words at that point.
Yeah. Though I don't give Alfred total clearance on this because he does allude to the fact that maybe Tristan purposefully didn't save Samuel in order to get Susanna. And he had made that accusation to Tristan. And Tristan's like, you ever say that again? We're not brothers. Like, you get this one time.
Oh, yeah. He goes, how convenient for you that Samuel is dead. That's some heavy shit.
Right. And in the horrific World War I scene, and they just show, I was watching that with my wife and was like, I just said to her, like, look how pointless this is. Look how just a waste. These just waves of people just throwing themselves at this barbed wire and gunfire.
And that's how it was.
Yeah, it's horrific, you know.
Yeah, that's what they did. That's very accurate.
But then Tristan tries to save Samuel, and of course can't. He's a moment too, he's a few steps too far away from those guys who machine gun him, and then he just brutally murders. Well, he brutally kills the guys who killed his brother. I think that, see, that's tough because like it's no longer defense of another because he's clearly dead, but it's like immediate retribution. It's like unleash the cops, you know?
Yeah. I totally give. If I saw somebody kill my brother in front of me, yeah, I mean, that'd be the end of them. And I wouldn't feel bad about it for 1 second.
Now, do you give him a pass on going out and getting all the scalps later, though, from just other random Germans?
That is a hard question. I would probably say no. I don't give him a pass because, I mean, he's already recognized that the war is futile. He's just there to defend Samuel. So now that Samuel is dead, his purpose for being in the war is gone. So it is pure revenge tactics, and it's revenge on it's revenge on nobody in particular. It's like almost like taking it out on a tree or something like that, except these trees are human beings.
But they are engaged in combat. I mean, they are soldiers, and they are there to, if they see you, they'll kill you.
Right, yeah. And in that sense, you're right. It's not murder in the sense that he didn't stalk somebody out who wasn't involved at all to kill them. So I can't say that it's like murder in that sense, but I mean, like the very fact that he took all the scalps, for instance, is the whole point is to, show everybody how superior he is as a warrior compared to them, and to make his claims about his fortitude in some way. So the very fact that he's collecting scalps is, in a sense, celebrating the deaths as opposed to doing them in a dispassionate way in which we might grant an executioner a stay on the fact that he's killing a human being because he's doing so only as a service to humanity or society or whatever. Clearly that's not the case for Tristan. He's doing this not just as revenge, but as like proof and celebration. He's reveling in it.
Yeah, and the madness has taken over. I think that he's not in a way of he doesn't have the ability to control his emotions, right? And so this is like one of his initial breaking points, Samuel dying, and then him kind of like seeking this revenge, this very graphic revenge. And then when he gets home, he can sort of quell it for a little while, but then it sneaks back up because he hasn't dealt with it, right? If we're talking Jordan Peterson style, he hasn't dealt with the demons, and he needs to save his father from the dragons.
It's the whale. Have you even read Western civilization? Have you even comprehended Western civilization as it? Whatever. I can't fake him as well as I can fake others.
All right, Robert, chime in here.
I don't know where else you guys want to go because I would love to talk about the bootlegging.
Yeah, let's get to that if you don't have any opinions on the scalping.
Well, I think it says something about the human mind where you're beyond any kind of civilized thoughts when you start hunting humans and taking trophies. If you're at the point where you are trophy killing, I think your mind is broken at some point. I mean, I'm talking humans, of course. I'm not necessarily denigrating hunters and their trophy taking or whatever, but yeah. And it happens throughout human history in terms of war. I mean, you watch a movie like Full Metal Jacket and people have that necklace of ears. It's what people do when they have gone over to the dark side in their brains. Yeah.
I mean, it's not as horrific as killing a truly innocent person, like say on a street serial killer style, but this is not just, normal war. This is not like dispassionate war killing where it's, well, I'm defending my land because it's my land and these are foreign invaders, and it's clearly psychologically demented. Well, and politicians would love for the propaganda of war to be this noble, civilized endeavor, this, organized, efficient. We're gonna, we're all about our supply lines, and we're gonna have structures, and we're going to have groups and platoons, and we're going to have armies, and they're all going to be following orders, and everything is going to be perfectly organized and regimented, and everybody's going to understand their role and what they're doing. And it's really that it tries to turn this immoral mass murder slaughter campaign into the most, dispassionate, like you're saying, like Borg killing machine. And I'm not sure which is more honest. I tend to think Tristan's like psychotic break is a little more honest when it comes to, hey, we're going to have these things called governments, and politicians are going to send these young men out to slaughter each other.
who have never done anything to each other and have no reason to do so other than to this, perverse sense of achieving some sense of manhood through doing it. Just twisting this, natural human energy and sense of wanting to do right in the world and then doing something horrifically immoral.
Yeah,
perverting. Of course, you're gonna have psychotic breaks, and I think Tristan's is probably more honest.
Right, and when governments do it, it's almost machine-like. It's like almost a relentless, unstoppable thing. And what would that guy say in the 60s? You go, throw your body in the gears, right? That was back when the left was anti-war.
Wait, the left was anti-war?
Yeah, in the 60s through the, till about 2008.
Till Dukakis or something like that.
It's been so long. I'm starting to think it's more of a myth.
Well, it's a myth just like this movie, which we should probably talk about the myth of Prohibition, right?
Yeah, let's talk about Prohibition. That was something that worked, didn't it?
It worked fabulously. I mean, as we know, not only did alcohol go away as the historic blight it was on society, but pretty much all the drugs, including the heroin and the marijuanas, and it was all gone. We now have a utopia, and it's just fabulous. I mean, it's great.
When you want to get rid of a bad thing, you just make it illegal, and then poof, like a magic wand, these wizards in Washington just make things go away. It's really wonderful.
So I only have to pass a law against man buns, and suddenly Dan's just going to be fucked.
Yeah, he's boned.
Well, I mean, with that man,
it is a crime against humanity. I mean, it is a hate crime. That haircut.
Well, as it is with that haircut, man, he might be getting boned as it is.
Well, he's kind of looking, yeah.
It's
power
hanging
bottom. I don't know.
It's flowing. It's Tristan style.
He's looking
style of the movie here.
He's looking very cute.
Do you spend like half your free time like walking under waterfalls?
Yes.
Your pitch taken? Okay.
I do. Yes. Fabio covers. Fabio's retired. I'm now at your grocery checkout.
I'm glad you're making some money. Good.
Yeah. So let's talk about the bootlegging, because Tristan, like I said earlier, he's living free. He's not recognizing man's laws here. He's like, this is something that I want to trade with people. They're willing to pay me. I'm willing to provide it. And he goes about and does it. And the O'Banion brothers kind of gave him a pass if he's sort of below the surface and not taking too much of their business, because they're in the government protected monopoly position here. I mean, they were like the original gangsters, right? In league with the government, but they weren't. I mean, they delivered booze to the party that Alfred had at his house, right?
Yeah.
At the big climactic scene that was a bit of a jumble, I think.
They definitely, yeah. They were showing Tristan in a warehouse making deliveries in back alleys in Helena, and then they showed, Alfred like overwatching some booze being delivered at his house, and then the O'Banion brothers making other deliveries for alcohol elsewhere. And it all kind of got jumbled up because there was no clear shots, close-ups of faces and things like that. There was no dialogue. It was like from 20 feet out in every way. So you had to like kind of know and intuit what was already going on, as opposed to them clearly spelling out. I mean, like the first time I watched this movie, I had not been aware originally that Alfred was having alcohol delivered to his house. So it's like it should have been a little clearer in the editing and the cutting, but I mean, what are you going to do?
Right, because this is when Tristan had gotten out of prison and was now going to kill the O'Banion brothers.
Well, I think that was a little after he was doing successfully at the rum running or at whatever. But yeah, I mean, it was after the O'Banion brothers came and threatened him the first time that he really started to have this problem, which was kind of at the end of that montage.
All right, yeah, I'm trying to recall exactly when it was. I know they threatened him and said, if your brother wasn't a congressman, we would have dealt with you long ago, and if we catch you again, it'll be the last time.
Yeah, he just walks away from that like he's unthreatened.
Right, living free. But I think during that montage that I'm thinking of, where it's sort of interspliced with the party and the police officer who had fired the machine gun and ended up killing Isabel too, who was Tristan's wife, and Tristan had gone to jail for that for 30 days or whatever, and he gets out. He wants revenge against the O'Banions, and so he goes into that warehouse and ends up getting the fight. He has the guy pinned down with a knife and cuts his face, but then for whatever reason he doesn't like finish it. I guess you need to have like some action in a movie, I guess. So then they end up tussling, and then he ends up on a pitchfork. But it's kind of interweaved with the party, but then also Susanna cutting her hair and then shooting herself. So this is all like the emotional climax of the entire movie. And Susanna's whole thing was she never got over Tristan, and she was never happy with Alfred, even though Alfred was the only like option available to her or whatever.
And he was doing quite well. I mean, she, if you were to look at it from, an objective sense or, whatever's on paper, she really had no excuse to be unhappy. It's not like Alfred treated her poorly. He treated her quite well. And, so that was just clearly some emotional instability on her part. She was just obviously not capable of being happy.
I think she saw him the same way that Colonel Ludlow saw him when he was working for government, as a parasite and as part of the problem. And rightfully blamed him for the death of Isabel too, because it was his support of that Volstead Act that ended up making this criminal enterprise, and this, kind of put the motion together here.
Yeah, perhaps. That'd be. I'm not going to say you're wrong. I'd probably have to even review it again, or perhaps read the original book to see if there's any insight into her character. But I don't know. It always seemed to me like she as a character, she was always looking for something better, and when she couldn't get it, she'd become melancholy. So, she's with Samuel originally, and I mean, they introduce her. They say her parents had both died, of what I don't remember, but she comes along, and the second she sees Tristan, she wants him, and and she's allowed to stay on at their family house for years at a time, waiting for these boys, and then when she can't have Tristan, she kind of begs him and says, well, I mean, if I was pregnant, would you still be leaving? And he's like, yeah, I would be. And it's just every time she can't have exactly what she wants when she wants it, she becomes pretty deeply melancholy and seems to just sort of sit there staring out over the plains, waiting until she can get what she has or gets what she wants.
Right. And it's something that she needs, one of these boys to give to her. It's not like something that she's going to go out and achieve for herself. It's like, yeah, she has no, like we said, she has no initiative of her own.
What do they call it? Agency?
Yeah, those words, things that, you look up in dictionaries. Who knows?
What do words mean?
I don't know.
Well, damn and blast us. We are near the end of our time on the show. So any final notes before we get into the summary and review time?
Can we talk about does anybody have any notes on the final fight?
Yeah, I have a few. I thought it was funny in both the scene with Isabel II's death and in throughout the movie. So there's 3 separate scenes where they have the police acting as enforcers for private interests. The first one with Decker at the beginning, where he's saying, "Oh, sheriff, that's a public office you hold. How are you telling me this is a private affair?" And then with Isabel II, they're clearly acting on the O'Banion brothers are there when a police officer negligently discharges a machine gun and kills a civilian, and he gets quote unquote reprimanded, as told to us by Alfred, while Tristan serves jail time, although an unbelievably small amount of jail time compared to what you'd be charged with today for even looking at an officer wrong. And then finally, in the final scene, the sheriff himself and 2 officers show up to enforce the O'Banion brothers' law. Yeah,
so this just goes to show you that as long as government has favors to sell, they'll be bought.
Yeah.
But I thought that you want to talk about the situation, right, Robert? The scenario where the O'Banion is there to kill Tristan with support of the police. And he threatens the family, right? He's like showing the gun to Tristan's son, Samuel. And the father comes out and he knows what's going on. And he got the shotgun that was given to him as a gift by Tristan under his bearskin jacket, and ends up, stroke and all, getting to be able to fire off 2 shots to take out the O'Banion brother and the police officer with the machine gun. And then the sheriff from the very first sheriff scene, he's back again, and he's about to shoot Colonel Ludlow. And Tristan is going to dive in front of him to save his dad. But just before the sheriff can shoot him, Alfred redeems himself in a moment of putting his family above his government service and shooting the sheriff who's about to kill his dad and his brother.
Yeah, I just thought it was a fantastic scene. And I can't, fault any of the people, any of the main characters for their actions. I mean, I think they all acted as they should have.
And especially Tristan there, when he was like accepting his own death, when the O'Banions came for him, he said, "Fine, I understand why you're here, but you take me away from my boys." you don't let them see. And
Right.
I mean, being willing to accept your own death and in such
Even
a way,
an unjust murder, right?
right? But if you're still thinking about like I've got to still think about my family, even if it means I'm going to die. I mean, those are some serious cojones there. So I got to give it to them.
Yeah, it was a very Father's Day moment there. And,
And then what happens to the bodies of the cops?
they bury him, and then they drop the car in the Missouri River.
Yep.
Damn straight. I don't know what happened. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. Some guy came on my property. I told him to get out of here. He was gone. What mounds? I don't see mounds.
Right, and then Tristan just goes and lives in the mountains for the rest of his life.
Pretty much, yeah.
And he bequeaths his children to Alfred, who has now redeemed himself in the eyes of his father and the eyes of Tristan, and is welcomed back into the family, and then is given the children to raise as his own.
Yeah, and I mean, they say that he went into the far north country, sort of like up in Calgary area where the hunting was still good, and dies from fighting a bear.
Yeah, 1963, so he must have been almost 70.
Yeah, I mean, I hope to be that ballsy when I'm 70.
That's a good way to go out.
Pull out a Bowie knife against a grizzly bear and just be like, yeah, I feel like I got a pretty good chance against this one. I mean, maybe not 50-50, but I got a 30% chance of getting out of this.
You're telling me there's a chance, like Alfred said to Susanna. All right. Any other points on that, or should we get into the final summaries here?
Find some.
All right, Robert, lead us off.
All right. Well, I think there are some uneven acting and there's some uneven storytelling, but at the heart, this movie has a really strong emotional story to tell. Even with Suzanne not really having a whole lot to do other than be a counter to the boys. So maybe that's not like the epic love story. It's more a story of these three brothers and more kind of like the two brothers and the father. But yeah, it's a great story with a really strong father figure who, if more fathers were like this guy, man, I think we'd have a whole lot fewer problems in the world, honestly. He's teaching his boys to defend what's theirs, not to go out and take what's somebody else's. It's fantastic. So yeah, this movie has a great story to tell. It features fantastic characters, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It is a little bit long, and maybe a little bit of the storytelling is a little bit, wait, what? But overall, I can't fault too much of it. So I think this is a strong 8.2 for me. Highly recommended.
Wow, that's a very, very high score. All right, professional asshole, bring it to the table.
Well, I really enjoy the movie, not just because of the personal connection of, anarchist Presbyterians living out in the middle of the Montana wilderness and, finding their way, which for a while was a serious consideration of my own, as we've talked about at other times. I agree with Robert that the acting, especially on Brad Pitt's part, was pretty weak. On Samuel's part, it was okay. The guy who played Alfred, his name was Aidan Quinn, was decent acting. Pretty darn good acting by Anthony Hopkins. I'm not a huge fan of Julia Ormond, who plays Susanna. She, in almost every movie she's in, she's just there to be disruptive, and she's got these super big puppy dog eyes that are like, I'm helpless, please come save me type. I'm not into those kinds of heroines. I don't know. But overall, I would probably give this movie, being a little more assholey than Robert, I would probably give it around a 7.5 or maybe an 8, but probably not over an 8, just because of the good, strong libertarian themes and the nice cinematography for which it won an award. And I'm always impressed by the cabin. I can never tell if I want to go live on a sailboat or in a mountain cabin or something, but one of those appeals to me. Yeah,
you get kind of both in this movie.
Yeah, you do. The Javanese hunters with the boar tusks and all that. That was great.
Yeah, well, I'll say that I thought that this movie was beautiful. I felt like the story was... I didn't really understand what the story really was. And perhaps after our discussion, if I were to watch it again and devote the 2.5 hours or so that it would take for me to watch it, I might enjoy it a little bit more, because it might make a bit more sense knowing that it's the O'Banion brothers at the beginning and it's the farmhand that they're looking for at the very beginning and all of that stuff. So the story meanders a little bit for me, but I love the libertarian messaging from the Colonel, and his, even after the stroke, he's like, screw the government, flipping him off. And he makes great points, like Robert was saying. if more fathers were like him, there'd be a lot less war in the world. There'd be a lot less terrible stuff, and people would have agency, unlike Susanna, and actually do something productive in the world. And he rightly says, government has neither wisdom nor humanity, and their solutions to problems are generally worse than the problem. So for that and that message alone, I'm going to go with a 7 on this movie. So overall, pretty good. It could have been, I think, done a little bit more cohesively and make a little bit more sense. Perhaps in reading the book, it would have made the movie-going experience more enjoyable. You know how often they'll say the book is better than the movie? I think sometimes you need the book to flesh out what the movie's trying to tell you, because the movie can only fill in so much. I'm sure they left a bunch on the editing room floor. Probably something with the ranch hand first showing up. I'm sure that would have been a scene that they probably would have shot. I don't know if I have access to any of the deleted content, deleted scenes or director's cut, but sure that kind of a thing would have been in there. But overall, it's still a really good movie, and I appreciate you bringing it up. It's a very strong father figure for this Father's Day for episode 76 of The Last Nighters at lastnighters.com/76. So thank you, Professional Asshole, for being here with us for this special occasion.
Here.
I appreciate you guys having me on, and I always revel in a chance to unleash my good assholiness.
Yes, well, we do appreciate it, and we will have you back again before too long. And speaking of having someone back, Robert, next week, we're going to have a returning person we've talked to before. You'll be back.
Ooh.
So will Doc Anarchy.
Ooh.
We haven't had him on in a very, very long time. And
Dallas Buyers Club?
Yes. And our Last Nighters audience probably can't even find that in our back catalog. But I will give you guys a link to it in the show notes page for this one at lastnighters.com/76. But we're going to be doing Tropic Thunder.
Oh, that's
nice.
That's nice. That's awesome.
So that'll be a fun one, another war movie, but with a comedic kick, which I think we could use again. I know we just did Harold and Kumar, and that was a great episode. I feel like we shoehorned in some economics and some libertarianism, and it turned out well.
Yes. We'll probably be able to shoehorn some into Tropic Thunder too.
I think so. I think we will. So that'll be a lot of fun. If you guys like the content we do here, give us some reviews on the old iTunes, now called Apple Podcasts. That'll help get our profile raised so that we will be recommended to others. Also, please give us subscribes on the old YouTube. We are still working our way towards that 100. And if we get 100, we get a custom URL. We're so close. We're at 88 right now. So if a dozen listeners can do that for us, we will get youtube.com/lastnighters. That'll be great.
Other worries. Thank you, Professional Asshole, for unleashing your assholiness all over us tonight. And come on back next week for Tropic Thunder. Daniel?
All right. Good night, everyone. All right, we're still doing Actual Anarchy for a few more moments. Any final words for the audience from Professional Asshole and then Robert?
Well, I just appreciate you guys having me on, and oh man, I'm gonna have to really start thinking of some extra movies for us to review, because I do have some really good libertarian ones. But you guys just keep doing what you're doing, because I really love hearing about movies from a Rothbardian anarcho-capitalist perspective, and hopefully in the future we can really start diving into some TV shows or something.
Yeah, come on back. We'll be doing more Star Trek TNG, and then I'm sure there are some more classic TV episodes that
I think you guys should honestly do Chernobyl. I think I maybe mentioned it in private conversation, but you guys should really do the HBO docudrama miniseries Chernobyl, because it really harangues the Soviet socialist model as being by and large the cause of the accident there.
Excellent. That is really hot right now. I mean, it's not like nuclear disasters can't happen in other places and haven't happened in other places, but I'm glad to hear that communism takes a good kicking.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting, and I particularly enjoyed it because back when I was getting my degree in biochemistry, I had to take thermodynamics and thermodynamics and quantum physics as part of my course load. And so you do study in that significantly. I had to take a whole semester on nuclear physics. and it was hellish, but the stuff is so fantastically interesting.
Well, how long is the series? Is it something that we would need to do into multi-parts, or can we cram it all into one episode?
Well, you guys are the experts on cramming things into small holes, so I'm not really sure. But it's 5 episodes that are about an hour apiece, and you probably have to do it in a 2-parter, to be quite honest. But it would split very well into like dealing with the initial disaster itself, and then sort of the fallout afterwards. But I have to, maybe I can find somebody who's really good with, or who can really explain the mechanics of nuclear fission for you guys. But that would be really interesting.
Cool. Sounds good. Maybe we can check that out.
But we can start getting into Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is a more laid back, chill out by the pool, California gangster party style. It's available for Patreon supporters at actualanarchy.com/Patreon. This is actualanarchy.com/133, the show notes for this one. But I'll play us out. Check it out at actualanarchy.com/133 for show notes and more for this episode. Thank you, The Professional House, for being our guest on this Father's Day episode, talking about Legends of the Fall. And we'll say goodnight. See you next week on Tropic Thunder, everyone. Peace out,
everybody.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.